Are going good. Everybody still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Fernando. Everything's perfect.
Yeah, awesome. Good, it's working. So welcome to the safety seminar. We talked about, myself being one of the safety officers. Get back over here. Make sure so title of the seminar I gave it was There I Was. I kind of used it off of some AOPA, Air Safety Institute's podcasts that I've been listening to lately that I think are pretty beneficial and cool, and we'll bring those up at the end. The bottom line, though, is being scenario-based is a little more fun than just me giving you academics. So we're going to application of risk management, aeronautical decision-making, and single pilot resource management. I'm Fernando Molina. We talked about that. Current CFI with the club, commercial multi-engine, commercial single-engine. Instrument. I'm a retired Air Force backseater in the F-15E, so I got a little bit of experience back there in a previous life, and so hopefully a little qualified to at least talk. I'm not one of the oldest CFIs or longest flying CFIs with the most hours, but I think I understand risk management a little bit, and I'll try to make this fun and interesting. So overview is going to be talking about that stuff. It is going to be a little bit academic at the beginning. We'll go through definitions. I'm going to treat this as a review, though. So I'm going to have the definitions up. We're going to go through all this kind of stuff. Hopefully you should have gotten the opportunity to register and get wings credit or register for wings credit. We are going to submit a roster at the end of people who actually showed up. So if somebody registered and didn't show up, then I think Nathan's going to hold down the hammer on that. But the local FAST team is pretty cool about enabling the wings credit for this. And so we talked about wings credit at our last safety meeting. For those of you guys who are not aware, it's a great opportunity at the FAAsafety.gov website. I'll put the links at the end of the presentation. And we'll talk about, there's all kinds of academics. There's stuff you can go. You can actually get credit for doing flights, accomplishing some of your check ride type maneuvers with a CFI and get it signed off. CFIs can sign off academics as well. And then AOPA, if you're an AOPA member, Air Safety Institute has a number of different academics, great safety accident case studies. And then what I like about what we're going to present today is There I Was is from people who actually they're alive. They're there to tell us about situations they had, because we all make mistakes in the airplanes. We all know that. And so thankfully we had some great stories from the There I Was podcast series about people who have actually been there. They've actually had some not so fun situations in airplanes, and they got to do a little bit to talk about it. So there's our overview. So there's my little fighter pilot image there. There I was. I threw that out because yes, it's about the podcast. So I'm kind of linking those two together. We all know that you know somebody's a pilot by just sitting and listening, because they'll tell you, or she'll tell you. Fighter pilots are no different. And since the beginning of fighter pilots that I've known, there I was, no lie, true story. That's a very cleaned up version of how we normally start stories in the fighter pilot bar. But it's a common start to fighter pilot stories for generations and all pilots in general, but that's just my background a little bit. The story's good the more the hand gestures get out there. So, the shooting your watch is a classic, just like the statue here, where fighter pilots like to use their hands. The more flagrant they are, the better the story gets. Although there is a common rule, it's a 10% rule, that at least 10% of the story has to be true for it to be a really good story. So yeah, saying a story's true doesn't make it so, at least amongst fighter pilots. Sometimes you want to be colorful. In our case, I make a joke of that, but the reality is we want to tell stories to learn from them, because general aviation pilots don't have 40 pounds of thrust behind them to make up for mistakes. We don't have ejection seats and parachutes in general, at least not for our club airplanes. So what we want to do is we want to learn from mistakes, and we want to get better and be safe pilots. For one, it keeps our insurance rates low. So Nathan talked about that a minute ago, but it also, it has us be able to live out there and have more passengers and have more fun flying adventures in general aviation airplanes that aren't always the newest, but man, so long as that wing's working and it's flying, it can take us to some cool adventures. So that's kind of the idea behind There I Was. So there's a reference to this. Got to make it academics a little bit. Oh, Nathan just posted the link to wings credit. I'll post it again a little bit later. So there's the references. I'm going to stop this. And I'm going to bring the references up. So Pilot's Handbook, Aeronautical Knowledge, hopefully everybody knows where that is and what that is. If you don't, I'll show you an example real quick. And then there's an FAA Risk Management Handbook. So let me pull that up. You get a quick glance. Chapter 2 is Aeronautical Decision Making. So if you're not used to going to the actual FAA references for any of your stuff, if you're getting ready for a check ride or you're doing training of any type, in the last 3 years and the 6 check rides that I've taken, every single time, aeronautical decision making, risk management, some question about what would you do in this situation and scenario, you know, what's the 5P model, what's the 3P model? We're going to go through a lot of those. What's the reason here? This is a great little thing right there, page 2.2. Notice that a majority, the 2 biggest columns are a takeoff and initial climb and landing. If you count some cruise and some maneuvering incidents, like 83% of your flight time, you see this little section right here and the number of accidents that happened during that flight time. You're looking at 2% here and probably on the order of 15% amongst all 3 of these. But in reality, you're talking about between maneuver, approach, landing phase, and the initial takeoff and climb. That's like 80% of all your accidents. But it's a much smaller portion of the entire flight time that we're in. So this is a good chart to explain kind of why we like to do risk management, to kind of focus on those areas, focus on the times where there is risk, and then try to focus that time for learning. Handful of other stuff, but you'll see some of the things that I went through, or I'm going to go through in this presentation. And you can see it's all here. I'm not just making it up. These things have gone through changes. There's the handbook I told you, it's 113 pages. There it is, the Risk Management Handbook. You can see there, again, all the same references in a lot more excruciating detail. So if you ever want to get really good at risk management or maybe do a school paper on it or something like that, the FAA handbook is there. Or if we want to do research because you heard something, what's going on. The idea is if you study these things and you actually use them, if you, I believe that when you go to a check ride, what I teach people for check ride prep is that if you show this knowledge, then it demonstrates to the DPE that you're prepared. And I feel that like a safe attitude is close to 80% of what they're looking for. I think by the time you get cleared to a check ride by your CFI, it's just acknowledged that they feel that your flying is decent enough to pass that check ride. But I mean, you can make a handful of small mistakes. If you show unsafe decision-making or unsafe flying, then that's gonna be a no-go for any DPE that I've met. So there you go, those are the references. And I wanted to show them to you. I encourage you, if you are a student pilot, to always bring those into your training, bring them into any of your tests and make sure you demonstrate this knowledge, almost, not above all else, but make it paramount, because we're going to make mistakes throughout our flying career. I know a lot of the older folks, in fact, some of the folks in my group talked about, you're always learning. And the idea is when you find yourself in unusual situations, that the most important thing you can do is stay calm, be the PIC via your 91.3 responsibility, and get through that situation and come home and then learn about it. Okay, so here's the academic portion, right? So that's the references. What is risk management? Decision-making process designed to identify hazards systematically, right? So the point here is not make it haphazard, not just make it accidental. There's a great quote that, the lack of an accident does not make it true that you actually are accomplishing safe flying. So ideally, you have a systematic approach to every flight. Assess the degree of risk, determine the best course of action through any situation. It's all about accident prevention. And while I say that, like, let's be realistic. Flying is a risky endeavor, right? So we all know that. But the point is, from the point where you start thinking about flying, next day, a week from now, whenever, you start ideally as a good safe pilot, you start risk managing from that moment. You start thinking about the weather, you start thinking about how proficient am I? Hopefully you're getting your flight bag and you're pre-flighting, whatever, your Rice Krispie treats and your helmet and your headset and whatever you're using for the equipment that day. If you're going night flying, obviously that you're preparing for what's going on, through to pre-flight planning, through to pre-flight of the airplane, and so on and so forth. And each step of that way is building, if you want, a buffer so that when when an incident happens or something unusual, excuse me. So when something starts to happen, you've got all kinds of cash in the bank that you can start withdrawing checks from prior to, unfortunately, any kind of catastrophic type of thing. So that's the idea. There's lots of things we can do in airplanes, and there's lots of leeway, and there's a little bit of mistakes that we can make, and just have the buffer of the altitude, the airspeed, the situation we're in, and then bring the airplane back. And like I said, learn from it. Okay, there's 4 principles of risk management. So the 4 principles, again, this is straight from the book, seems very academic, but the fact is there's 4 different ways to approach it. We can accept no unnecessary risk. We can make risk decisions at the appropriate level. We can accept risk with benefits. And then we can integrate risk management into planning at all levels. Those are 4 principles. I'll go on real quick. So accept no unnecessary risk literally means like there's a cloud in the sky, which in Vegas would be like, small little puffy way on the north side. So I'm not going to go flying. So that's, you can go that conservative. That's okay. I'm the type of guy who I'll never question somebody else being safe and conservative if they want to. Or you look at that puffy and go, well, it's not close to where I'm going. And you accept not unnecessary risk. You just know that, okay, there's a chance that puffy will get bigger while I'm flying, but you assess what that really means to where you're doing. Only required for the operation to be successful. Now, a flip side of that is we're a quart low on oil. I can't find any. It's below what the POH recommends. But I'm only going 50 miles to the closest airport. Like, we can make it, right? So that's an example of now you're literally willingly accepting an unnecessary risk. When if you just wait, hell, if you want to, just go to the liquor store. They sell oil there. That's not the kind of oil we want to put in our airplanes, but I mean, you can always spend a minute or a couple minutes, go find the proper equipment, the proper oil, the proper stuff. I don't mean put any liquor store oil in our airplanes, by the way. So don't think that's what I'm meaning. So the point being is, you could always take another minute. So I'm missing a rag to clean my windscreen, but it's really dirty today. Just take 15 minutes, walk back to the clubhouse or go to the hangar, get yourself one of those chamois, clean the windscreen off so it's not a hazard when you're looking for traffic while you fly. So those are unnecessary risks that we don't need to take. You get to make the decision as the PIC because you're responsible for the safety in flight. So hopefully those weren't too lame of excuses. So making decisions at the appropriate level. This is probably an example. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to explain this. A flight operation. The operator is the one who's responsible for a lot of the parts of whether the airplane is flyable or not. In this case, we have a board of directors for the flying club that gets to make decisions based on what's safe for the club, what's safe for the members, what's our best decision for you get an insurance risk mitigation. There's military flying, right? So appropriate level for military flying is the operations manager before somebody goes flying, knowing that you're going to do some risk that day, but assessing every person's qualification when they go. The reality, though, is every airplane that's flown by anyone has a PIC. So the PIC via 91.3 FAR, if you're not familiar with that, hopefully you will be eventually as a student, is responsible for all of the risk and the acceptance of all the risk in the airplane. And we don't want to ever forget that. That's what I personally take to anybody who's sitting there going, well, the guy in the right seat was doing this, the person in the left seat was doing that. The passenger was, being silly or not behaving properly or getting sick. The bottom line is it's very cut and dry. Via FAR 91.3, the PIC is responsible for all the safe operation of the airplane, to include deviating if necessary for an emergency. So that's a responsibility that I take very seriously. And I generally, personally, as a CFI, take most decisions that we make back to that just core truth and that core rule. Okay, the third principle, accept risk when benefits outweigh the costs. This is the point of, I'm going to use this one as like a military pilot. When you dogfight, it's not a safe thing to point two airplanes at each other 500 miles an hour. There's an operation here that does dogfighting. That's fine. Those guys are trained to do it. We are not trained to do that in Cessnas. So, in a military airplane, you have to learn how to dogfight. The risk outweighs, or the benefit outweighs the risk, because you may have to do that someday and save your life. Two Cessnas dogfighting each other. I'm safe to say that aside from the occasional close call that happens, unfortunately, near Gene, we don't intentionally do that. and I don't want anybody in the club to think that we should intentionally end up beak to beak, nose on at the anywhere near the airport or doing maneuvers in the practice areas. So that's an example of there's somebody else in this practice area. I don't want a dogfight in my Cessna today or my Piper. Let me just move over to another one, or let me go do patterns now, or let's move on to some other procedure. I don't have to put myself close to another airplane unless it's been pre-briefed or it's legal. So that's one of my examples of actually finding a benefit that outweighs the costs. Or if you determine that it does not outweigh the risk that you're taking, then just don't do it. So there you go. It's a couple of examples. Integrating risk management and planning at all levels. This is kind of my example of, or what I was talking about at the beginning. Hopefully, we're thinking about risk management with everything we do. Pilots should be some of the best risk managers of anybody we know. My wife, I annoy the crap out of my wife when I'm like, why are you doing that? Why are you going to bring a jacket with you in the car when you drive to California? She's like, no, it's not a big deal. I'm like, yeah, but what if, dress to egress. She gets sick of hearing that from me because she's not going to egress from the car, but she hears it from me anyway. So the reality is risks are more easily assessed and managed in the planning stage. It's way easier at 0G and 1 knot. That's a joke, by the way. 1G, 0 knot. While we're sitting on the ground or in our chairs right now, it's much easier to talk about and think about what we're going to do on a flight, a simple flight between here and Gene, or cross country down to Lake Havasu to get a burger. To do it now, or another saying is, it's much better to be on the ground wishing you were flying than to be in the air and wishing you were on the ground. Here's a good quote there. The later changes are made in planning, the more time consuming and expensive they could become. That's a reality sometimes. For instance, we were going to plan a cross country in the Cherokee down to outside of Palm Springs. I'm forgetting the name of the airport at the moment, but it was for one of the members of the club, and it was to go to business meeting. Well, the reality is that business meeting meant that if you mean to make that meeting, then your contingency planning for a 4-hour drive, if the airplane's not good, or in that case, the weather wasn't good that day, is that you have to plan for making a go, no-go decision at 7 a.m. for an 11 a.m. flight, or 11 a.m. Meeting, right? So that way, you can take off at 9 if you want to, and you get down there in an hour and a half, but you don't want to put yourself in the corner where now it's 8:30. You're like, oh shucks, the winds did not pick up or get better the way we thought they were. And now you find yourself in the situation where those environmentals and the external pressures might push you into a bad decision. So this is just kind of one reason about how the later changes are made, the more risk you can actually accept, or the more time consuming your problems could be, or in that case, ends up being you miss a meeting that day. That's okay. That's what we do in flying. One of my takes that I tell students is you never have to go flying on any given day. You just never have to. So, it goes up there with some other sayings that are out there, like all go-arounds are free, and so on and so forth. So just consider that. The point being is if you rush yourself into decisions, it could be something that's a much more costlier in the end. Okay, let's see. Oh, yep. So I see Nathan's got there. Actually, hey, Nathan, I made the window come up. So Nathan was posting out there. If people have questions, comments they want to make, or you want to call BS on me if you want to. I'm pretty fair game. I got a thick skin. But if you hear something, or if you got a good example, then please feel free to chime in, and we'll do our best to address it. 3 steps in risk management: identify the hazard, assess the risk, and then mitigate the risk. Again, being systematic is the whole approach to decision making and risk management. So let's go through the steps of this. Hello. There it is. So identifying the hazard, I think this is common sense, right? Let's just take a moment, think about what's going on. In planning, we can think about the weather, thinking about what's going on. What are the squawks with the airplane? What is my pre-flight, my personal pre-flight for myself? Think about all stages of flight, experience, common sense, specific analytical tools help. There are some analytical tools in there to look at. Stuff like your own personal minimums. Those are things to not, sorry, somebody just sent me a joke. there are, your personal minimums is a great analytical tool to have. Something cool about personal minimums, a rule that I've learned is that, you know, don't ever change them on the day of a flight, because again, external pressures could lead to that. Assess the risk. So we talked about identify it, now assess it. Once you identify that there's some kind of a hazard, like there's a nick in a tire, right? So to a brand new student, that may seem like a big deal, like, oh my gosh, the tire might blow up. To a more experienced pilot, you can look at it and go, there's no cord showing or there's no major bald spots. It looks like a serviceable tire. I've seen 100 of these, not a big deal. So assessing the risk to your flight that day is something you can consider. You know, we had a good talk when I first joined, and I really appreciated, you know, being able to talk about this with Nathan when there was an ADI out, an attitude indicator out on one of the airplanes. And I was going to actually take it out there with a student to do maneuvers. So I'm like, you know, it's visual maneuvering. We're outside. The horizon is actually my attitude indicator. But if for some reason you have to go back up to instruments, it just wasn't worth losing the, you know, the backup to my primary instrument, which was the horizon. So I decided we weren't going to take that day, and we switched to another airplane. So, so assessing the risk is the application of quantitative and qualitative measures. Define the probability and severity of an accident or what can result based on the exposure to the risk. That's step one we identified. All right, and then finally mitigating. Mitigating is just finally doing something about it. So there's lots of people who identify risk, lots of people who actually assess, oh, that could cause this or could cause that, and then they still go flying. So do something about that risk and mitigate it. Either if according to 91205, you find out that you don't need that instrument for flight, then do the right thing and go to 91213 and placard it properly and render it unusable, for instance, as an example. Or you go, hey, you know what? It's looks like we're running late, so we might go into night. So I need to make sure I got a flashlight on me, because what was the person in a dark airplane without a flashlight? So mitigating the risk, again, is just do something. You can use effective control measures, to eliminate and control most risk. And oftentimes just avoiding that risk is a good way to mitigate the problem. All right, so moving on. Anybody, let's see, the day after, let's see. Great quote there, Drew Myers. The day after I get there, Ida's fatal flight is usually bright and sunny. And unfortunately, that's a sobering but true quote, is the fact that we learn the best, unfortunately, after somebody else's bad mistake. So getting maximum benefit. In order to get the maximum benefit, we just went through the 3 steps. Let's apply the steps in sequence. Don't go straight to, I know the risk today and how I'm going to mitigate it. Just go through the 3 steps and do them in order and find each hazard and assess what it's going to be for that day, because it may be different for a different day. Oh, I saw that hazard a couple weeks ago. It didn't do a thing, so it's probably not a big deal today, would be a bad quote. Assess it for each day and for each flight and that mission that day, and then make sure you do something about it, mitigate it. Maintain balance, apply process in a cycle, as in continue to reevaluate those hazards and continue to look on how you can mitigate them. Continue looking for new hazards and then involve other people in the process. I like the way that the 3 of us for the safety club met, the safety officers have met, and I've already bounced a number of things off each other. And I'm happy for my short time in the club so far that I'm seeing the CFIs do the same thing and bounce things off each other. So we've got a Facebook group. Feel free to do that, and you know, bounce things off of folks in the club. And ideally, if you really got a hard-hitting question, then ask a CFI. Okay, so once we have done that, identifying risk is one thing. Assessing it, one of those things in assessing it is assessing the level of risk. So probability, severity, and exposure are 3 ways that we describe it. I'll leave it at that because I'm going to show you a cool chart about these. And this, I think, Nathan, you said you're going to be able to show this and people will be able to see it again later. So I'm not going to hit too much on the words anymore, or a little less. Probability, you categorize it as probable, occasional, remote, and improbable, i.e., like what's the likelihood of something happen? A small nick in a tire, but there's no cord showing. Okay, so there's a better chance than a perfectly brand new tire of that tire being flat when I get to Gene and do touch and goes. But it's probably a remote chance if it's still a reasonably new tire as opposed to one that's showing bald spots and maybe a cord or 2. In the quarter 2 example, maybe probable, probable flat tire at an out base is what we don't want to do. So that's a risk that we identify and might mitigate it in that case by not going flying. So you can see that we'll assess the probability. Severity is another second part. Don't just do probability. Make sure you assess the severity as well. The severity of a flat tire at Gene is not the same thing as severity of losing your engine because you took off with a quart load of oil. So in the severity, we think about negligible, marginal, critical, and catastrophic. So thinking about the probability of loss of engine power on takeoff, that could be critical minimal, if not catastrophic, depending on how you handle it. So so if we take both probability and severity, we can assess our risk. And I would say that level of assessment is one of the more important things you can do. Like I said, we're always going to have some hazards, some risk when we fly. Let's just take this methodical approach, systematic approach, according to the definition, to assess what's high versus low and what's a higher probability versus lower probability. Other things that are challenges, this bottom part, we'll talk on it a little bit more later, but realizing that as single pilots in single pilot resource management, that includes if you have passengers, but they're not experienced, right? Let's think about that because, we're taking people with us. And that's the sad part to me about the 80% of bad decisions that cause some accidents is a lot of people just unfortunately take passengers with them. I don't think any of us mean to, but that's why we're going over this stuff to hopefully avoid the next one or anyone, knock on wood, from the club. Our own challenges, fatigue, proficiency, weather, pressures, those can push us into risk that we didn't plan for. And once you start going down the path, the chain of an accident, if you will, trying to find a place to break that chain is really important. So let's be mindful of that. This is a chart. This is right out of the PHAC in that chapter 2. So assessing, if we're up here where the probability is high that something can happen and the likelihood or the severity of it happening would be catastrophic, that's probably a time to sit there and go, let's not go flying, i.e. Let's not take the Cardinal into the thunderstorm, right? The probability that something bad would happen if I fly the Cardinal in a thunderstorm or that Gary would get mad at me, as well as the catastrophic possibility for all the different hazards of a thunderstorm are really, really high. So let's find our way to either go to less severity, like avoid the thunderstorm by 50 miles if possible, or take the probability down by just not flying today while the thunderstorm's there. Let's wait for a clear day, right? So you can do that, or ideally you go down diagonally all the way to a place where it's improbable and it's negligible that there's a problem, like a clear day when there is no thunderstorm or no other convective activity. So that's just one way to do it. You can do this with every single risk you assess. So assessing how that risk, that's one of our 3 steps, right? Affects us in the flight today and what our mission is today is the step. Finding a way to mitigate it and finding a way to go down this chart is kind of what your goal is. Any of you students, I got to do this on one of my check rides. Bust this out to a DP. I'll bet you he'll look at you with glossy eyes. Maybe he'll ask you on a date, or she. All right, I see a couple after, sir. Mitigating. We talk about mitigating being one of the steps. So after the assessment, we talk about mitigation of risk or reduction. Sometimes it's accepting the risk for the flight because it's something that we think is small. But let's realize that in risk management, the FAA gives us a whole bunch of little checklists that we're able to go there. I'm going to talk through all of them. I'm going to try to get through them as quick as we've been talking here. So I'll also let you know the ones that I use, but they're all there, right? These are all there, and they're the ones that the FAA teaches. And again, they're ones that you will most likely, I'm kind of speaking to the students a little bit, but refreshers for all of us, realize these are ones that you need to know as you move on. All right, so the PAVE checklist. What we do is we can start off, in my opinion, I do them in this order. I start off my risk management. If you go flying with me, by the way, especially if I haven't flown with you before, but almost every day, like risk management is risk management is risk management. You either do it all the time or you invite risk on the days you don't do it. So I'm going to do the PAVE checklist, and I'm going to do the IMSAFE checklist with you, and I'm going to ask you to do it with me anytime we go flying. And even if we just acknowledge, how are you doing? PAVE checklist complete. Yep, we're good. Or how's your IMSAFE? I'm fine, totally rested, all good. So let's just, I'm going to ask you to do that. here's the categories. So first is the pilot, the PIC in particular. You remember you could have a PIC and a second in command, or CFI and student, but you can have multiple pilots, so you want to assess both of them. In the aircraft, we're looking for the airworthiness of the aircraft and all this stuff. Remember, that starts with the time you schedule it to when you're getting the squawks, to assessing where the hours are. Is it close to its overhaul or not overhaul? That doesn't necessarily mean it's riskier, but it's just a data point, and so on and so forth, all the way to the pre-flight, to flying, and then you just getting to know your airplane while you're flying. The environment, this is kind of the tricky one if you haven't done this in a while, but the V is environment. I remember that because external pressures kind of starts with the big E, and there's no V in external pressures. So that's my elimination of knowing that's not the V. So the environment and external pressures, right? So environment is all the kind of stuff that goes into your flying, like what's the weather today, what's the actual personal environment of the people you're flying with, where you're going. So you can bring a lot of things into environment. It's kind of almost a catch-all. External pressures is ones we were talking about a little while ago. And that day with the Cherokee, I thought went really well because we talked about, what the risks were for flying. We talked about what the contingencies were for making the no-go decision. It turned out there were high winds. It turns out they weren't going to get any better. And so made the decision at the no-go point, and then just went about our day rather than, being there with not so good winds, trying to make a decent landing somewhere and not having anything unusual happen. Meetings, weddings. Weddings are famous for, you got to get there. So the best thing we can do to mitigate external pressures like that, especially time ones, is just, we're general aviation flyers, right? We don't have to fly like an airline. We don't have commercial, budget and major constraints. You never have to go flying. So that external pressure part, I build into my flying plan the what if we don't go flying tomorrow. If it's just, okay, we just reschedule a lesson, no big deal. If it's I need to be at a wedding, then I have a rental car at least reserved and ready to go. And I'm going to make the decision in time to be able to make that drive in the rental car. So that's just something that I do. That's one example. And I hope you guys can consider those kind of things for your personal external pressures in flights. All right. IMSAFE Checklist is another one. So I like the IMSAFE Checklist in order from PAVE because the IMSAFE is what I do to assess the P part of PAVE. Proficiency is another piece. Currency is another piece. But IMSAFE is another just individual. Was I out super late last night? Am I feeling a little sick? Did I have to take a little bit of anxiety medicine just because it's something that I have, but at go, I'm perfectly legal to fly with it, but how does it affect me today, given that I'm already that plus tired? Or stresses, making sure that you don't have stresses like trying to make my daughter's wedding. Alcohol is a no-go. I mean, that's just a no-brainer for anybody. If anybody's even considering that, I used to always joke about no drinking within 50 feet, no smoking within 8 hours, but that's just a joke, right? I mean, you cannot play with this rule. So alcohol, don't do it. Don't even consider it. By the way, alcohol gives you stress. It also makes any medication worse. It also adds to fatigue. So how about that? Mitigate or increasing risk for 3 other factors. Fatigue is one you can't second guess. I got 8 hours of sleep last night, but I got 2 hours of sleep the 4 nights before that. Is actually something some people don't consider. So you might want to watch that. Just realize that fatigue can happen in a lot of ways. Just like maybe I am perfectly rested. I worked or I slept 8 hours last night, but I worked an 8-hour day and I want to go take a 4-hour cross country. You effectively are going to do a 12-hour day, and there's no flying outfit that I know of that allows that professionally. And then eating, you can't overstep. Well, it's a missed one. But realizing that you can get energy from your food throughout the day, and that if you do not eat anything throughout a day, in the scenario I just gave you, you worked all day and then you went flying for 4 hours, you can actually run yourself out of energy in the middle of the flight, and find yourself fatigued and tired right at the time that you're landing, at night and trying to make decisions. So there's the IMSAFE checklist with a couple of examples. All right, let's see, I'll do this here. Move right along. Hello. What's up with that? All right, well, I'll just talk to it. How about that? No big deal. So this is actually it's on the YouTube, and it's actually the video of the Quinnipiac accident that led to a lot of the Part 121 changes in rules, where first officer had a cold, probably fatigue. They were doing a lot of hot bunking in the what do you call it? The little sleep shacks that airline pilots had. And she's from the West Coast, was in New York. And so she was acknowledged tired and actually had interviewed with people about being tired before the flight. This airplane got itself into a stall in known icing in New York, crashed into a house. The accident pilot, the actual pilot in command or captain of the airplane, had a couple of known check ride failures. He acknowledged being tired as well. And then he actually, there was some training issues in this incident about him misapplying the anti-icing control inputs. And so just from the IMSAFE, there's like 5 different accidents in there. And if you see this online, because it's not working, oh, there you go, now it's trying to work. Did I screw that up? I hope not.
Here's an honest way to make yourself $1,220 or up to $4,880 per household and get to be vaccinated first by a major pharmaceutical
I just talked about
company.
it, so I'm not going to.
The trial is filling up fast. Don't miss this opportunity.
Screw this.
Sources close to an investigation.
I'm going to try to save this. What's funny is we rehearsed this and it went to.
Yeah, it worked fine when we were doing it before, but isn't it when it goes live that we always have issues? So
let me stop screen sharing. I'm going to bring it back in. Sorry, y'all. Da-da-da. Oh, it's going so smooth. Get out of the way. All right, moving that. Zoom meeting's back up. I think this should work. Desktop 1, share sound, share. All right, so look back to normal, I think.
yeah, I think we're good.
Boom, hope so. All right. Are you guys' video? There it goes. Let's get that out of the way. Let's get that out of the way. Are we seeing 3P model now?
We are.
Sweet. Oof. All right. So that was the accident. Just talk through it. But bottom line is it's Buffalo model. Thanks, Drew Myers. You put that up. That it was the Buffalo accident, and that's the one that was there. But if you get a chance to do this presentation online, or you choose to, if you look up that accident, it's what it is. Now the 3P model. 3P model is interesting because the FAA in the pilot's handbook describes this as something to do in your decision-making planning. I personally like the 3P model for flying because it's only 3 steps and it's easy. So as you do your previous checklist, you go to three parts. And to me, I take this as whenever something happens. In the military, there's a common procedure that I think is just drilled into everybody. And it's if there's an incident, we obviously aviate, navigate, communicate. We talk about that. But we always talk about maintaining aircraft control, analyzing the situation, and taking appropriate action whenever some kind of unusual situation or emergency starts. So to me, the 3P model is the easiest one to perform a similar step if something's going on. I'm starting to get a sputter in the airplane. I still have power, but let me assess. I'm perceiving that there's a change to what we're flying. Let me process what that change is. Oh, look, I left carb heat in. Let me push it back in, perform that action, and then hopefully get myself out of the situation. Let's just stay calm though. So to me, 3P is a great application checklist for actually executing in the airplane when you have some type of an accident. So that's what I like about 3P model. of the models that are taught in there. So perceive, we already talked about that. In order to perceive, you do need situational awareness. You actually have to know something bad is happening. Another perceive would be the example I gave earlier. Hey, I just went to the practice airspace and there's 3 other airplanes here. So let me perceive that, identify the hazard. I can use the checklist if I need to, the IMSAFE for PAVE, or just go, you know what, this doesn't seem right. Let me process. There's a separate system for process, lots of acronyms for the FAA. So what are the consequences, the alternatives, reality, external pressure? I'll stay in that example, right? Out in the airspace, there's 3 airplanes. I've got 2 other airspaces and an airport to go to do other types of practice work, or if I need to, just take it home. So those are the deals. What are the consequences? Remember, severity and probability of something bad happening. That's what we talked about as far as assessing what the consequences or what happens in that risk. So in this case, hitting another airplane is a bad consequence. Another quote I've learned is that fire, failure, and collision are 3 things you really can't do much about after they've happened. You just have to deal with the situation. So let's avoid those at all costs. So consequences, alternatives, reality, and then what other external pressures there are. Perform some action. And like I said, once you've figured out there's a risk, then let's do something about it. Different things you can do to perform. You can transfer the risk to somebody else. Your airplane, give it to your CFI, let them take care of it. Eliminate the risk. It's kind of a joke, but seriously, like, you know, you can try to transfer the risk or transfer the risk before flying. Like say, you know what, I'm not going to take this airplane today, and just not do that. Eliminate it, accept it, or mitigate. 3P model in a graph. This is in the book. Just want to show it to you. There's shows you where you can do your IMSAFE checklist. And it also shows you in accordance with the other things we've talked about, PAVE. There's the IMSAFE, there's the CARE checklist, and there's that team checklist. So it's kind of all put together. All right. The DECIDE model, I'm not even going to talk about this, to be honest with you. I wanted to introduce it because it is another one of the decision-making steps. I only use the DECIDE model personally on the ground. That's what I do with the DECIDE model because it's just too many steps for me to remember while I'm flying. But they teach it as a 5-step, 6-step process to actually accomplish things in the air as well. And in this case, I would say use whichever one is your preference. And those are the steps. Hopefully no one will get mad because I'm not going to spend too much time on that one. All right, aeronautical decision-making, systematic approach to mental process, used by pilots to consistently determine the best course of action. Systematic's been used twice now in risk management, in aeronautical decision-making. Wanted to highlight that. They go hand in hand, in my opinion. How do we do aeronautical decision-making? Risk management, we just talked about that at length. Situational awareness is what you need to actually realize that you have to do something to mitigate risk. And then single pilot resource management. To me, this is my way personally to avoid risk, which is having safe habit patterns and actually having the discipline to use them, right? So we talked about 80% of accidents are human factor related. The key is to understand that you need to act in a safe manner. There's an example there, engine fire scenario. Like you can memorize those steps, but if you don't understand how to apply them, then don't help you too much. Okay. Factors that affect decision-making, being familiar with the decision-making process. I believe we just went through all that quite a bit. So we'll start going a little faster and funnier. Some circumstances are beyond the pilot's control, and that's okay. What you do is you prioritize and maintain control of the things you can. And then recognize what circumstances can or cannot be managed. For instance, we can do all kinds of things in airplanes, but not stall, right? So you can do all kinds of controlled stuff. Most GA airplanes are very, very survivable in a controlled airport landing. You cannot stall the airplane. That's a manage what's controllable and what's in your pilot's control. One of my fundamental rules. Situational awareness. This is a long quote and it means you're supposed to know everything. So the beauty about situational awareness is you usually don't realize you've lost it until you gain it back. So it's the accurate perception of all the factors and conditions, flight, pilot, aircraft, environment, so on and so forth. We must do what we can with the tools we have to maintain as much situational awareness as possible. Okay, finally, 5 Ps. One more acronym and one more tool. I personally don't use it for single pilot resource management. I prefer the 3 Ps, but these are the steps. Talks about applying them for single pilot resource management. And so there I am introducing to you, again, also in chapter 2. So I just want to show it to you. right? Knowing that you should apply the 5 Ps. Reality, this is straight out of the book. You should be applying your risk management techniques in all phases of flight, okay? And I think I've given a ton of examples of all these already.
Hey, Fernando, we got a question from Drew real quick. Any comments about the normalization of deviant behavior? Like, I did it once and it worked out okay, but I could just do it again because every time I've done it before, even though it's risky, it's worked out okay.
So that's a good point, and it kind of goes back to, in my opinion, you apply risk management all the time. So just because you got away with doing something that technically is not with the POH, or technically not with, let's say, I don't know, let's say the club bylaws, or let's say it's one of the FARs, right? Just because you did it and got away with it doesn't therefore make it a safe act. So you think about that, right? If I am legal under a sparsely populated area, flying at an altitude to where if I lose an engine, I do not hit property or life, right? I can legally fly basically at surface all the way from here to Gene. And technically, as long as I don't fly over somebody, you know, that's legal. Is it safe, or am I proficient in it to make it safe, or am I current in that activity? Those are all decisions to put into there, because there's a lot of these things you can do that are legal, but you're really just waiting for the risk to take over and actually work against you, or the odds to work against you. So that'd be my answer to that, is applying the risk management every time. And just because you did something, if you properly address it or debrief yourself, then hopefully you go, wow, that was cool, but holy crud, we probably shouldn't have done that. That's a good sign to maybe not do it again. Hopefully that answers your question, Drew. That's my opinion. If any CFIs want to jump in on that, by the way, or add to it, then let me know. All right, recognizing hazardous attitudes is one last thing. So this is kind of the last piece, is as we're doing all these assessments, realizing that we could be our own worst enemy. These are the hazardous attitudes right out of the book. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, although I would argue that Drew's example probably shows anti-authority. That rule doesn't apply to me. If I didn't get hurt doing it last time, then I could probably do it again, or potentially either invulnerability, like I'm not going to get hurt doing this, or macho, depending on how you apply it. I guess is like, I'm tough, I can do this, watch me, are things you probably don't want to hear. And so I'll just apply that right to Drew's question. All right, cool. There you go. Now let's apply it real quick. Whew, academics are over. Now hopefully we'll have some fun. This is going to be some simple application, and I'm hoping to see if anybody's got an ideas of, let's say we're in pre-flight. You know what? Let's use a common example. Let's say we went down to Gene and landed, and went to the bathroom, shut down, came back. There's a pre-flight opportunity. Who thinks that that's a good time to just shorten it because we just went flying and that airplane's probably good? Or what risk can we take if we don't do a full pre-flight going through? I mean, do I have to take an hour doing it? No, but what risk is happening there if I choose to do an out and back between here or Boulder City, or land, drop off a passenger, pick up another passenger here at the club, and then and not do a full pre-flight? Yeah, I see Mark jumping in there. Pre-flight every time is clearly a safe way to do that, or a methodical way to do that. Systematic, if you will. Let me use that word again, since it's in the definitions for both aerodynamic, aeronautical decision-making and risk management. At least check for oil leaks. Vapor lock on a hot engine, yep. So those are two good reasons. Anytime you shut down, you have to realize there is a risk of the next time that thing starts up, one of the seals going. No rest areas in the sky. Nice. Okay, that's a good reason to pre-flight your pedal pack and when you go into the second flight. Checking for water and fuel if you haven't refueled. You know what? That's probably a place where you can sit there as a PIC and say, you know, maybe I don't need to. But what about contaminants or other stuff? You know, I think I can see where I can look at the fuel and go, I haven't added fuel to the system. That's not as big of an issue. But what if you sump the left tank and it's empty? Like, how would you find that out? Right? The way you would just do a simple sump and you would at least know there's something in there. Damaged tires, fuel leak. Thank Nathan. Basically validating the example. So you know what? Is the probability of something bad happening because I just flew the airplane and I don't see a puddle underneath it. Low, probably, but depending on what could happen. How about an exhaust leak? Those are things that if you don't do a full pre-flight or do a full run-up because I just flew the airplane, that you could catch. We can come up with a lot of what ifs. The point being, the safe thing you can do is do a walk around, do a pre-flight. Doesn't take too long, and it probably would mitigate some risks that would not unnecessarily be there. I already touched on run-up. Anybody think of some run-up issues that you find out, and if you don't do a full run-up could bite you? I can think of one major one. One of my favorites is the magneto check, right? Yep. Yeah, two of them just right on there. Good timing. Great minds thinking alike. That's a big one, right? So obviously the cost of a bad magneto check could be very telling and could be much worse once you're in flight. And a lead that's actually not grounding properly, actually biting you in flight by actually losing that mag later on. So that's pretty bad. It's not necessarily as catastrophic unless it ends up being 2P leads, but you never know, right? You never know on that one until you go. What's another one? You know, something else you could find out on a bad mag check is if it's your actual ignition switch, which is from the accidents that I've read where the ignition switch is the problem. It's a very subtle part of the mag check for you to figure out. But that being methodical about the mag check, which I like to do, is 2 clicks to the left, 2 clicks to the right, 1 click to the left, 1 click to the right. That's how I do it. Knowing those clicks and feeling them could be the way where you find out that that's the day your ignition switch happens to be, you know, getting worn down, and you can catch that key in between a left or right setting or off. Pattern entries, landing checks. What about, like, I haven't heard anybody on the radio. I'm entering Gene of all places, you know, and so I think we're good. We're just going to enter in there, and I'm getting busy doing my checklist, so I'll call base turn, and you maybe miss a couple of standard radio calls. You know, what kind of risk can we have there if we're not following our methodical procedures every single time? Oh, Drew added another one: fuel selector and off position. Yep, Nordo planes. People can always fly Nordo, so having a predictable pattern entry. Any of you guys been to St. George, where you have some of the smaller regionals, and they're flying in probably on an instrument approach, and you're popping in there. You're popping in there on your visual, probably bouncing around over the ravine from Mesquite, trying to make your way in there. It's really a short. Once you get over those ridge lines, it's short. So good point out, Drew. We always have the responsibility for traffic avoidance. So we want to always be mindful of that, but at the same time, being predictable, in my opinion. The guys that I know, or gals who are air traffic control, say that that's one of the biggest steps that they look for out of a professional pilot or a safe pilot is being predictable. Because if you go Nordo, you know, being predictable where you go makes it very much easier for them to deconflict from you. But more importantly than that, hopefully all the rest of the pilots know or expect you. And for some reason they missed a radio call, or they were off freak and suddenly got on freak, or they missed ATIS, so they went to it one more time, that they can expect where to see you. Straight in landings, straight in approaches is one example where people may not expect you there. And that's a great point there, Alan, one of the safety officers. It's another example of doing something that's legal but may not be smart. You're not very predictable when you're on a straight in approach. Oh, by the way, for those of us in the high wing airplanes, well, actually the low wings airplanes, right? What are you doing? You're belly up to those people on straight in approaches when you're doing your base to final turn. So that's a couple of examples. Landing checks, doing C-gumps or gumps checks every single time. I like to say C-gumps every single time in case I'm not in a carb heat airplane, but when I am, I catch it. Mine is carb heat. I check it. If I don't need it, that's fine. Gas for both the fuel selector switch as far as fuel shutoff valve. Then I go undercarriage. 75% of the time I'm flying, the undercarriage is fixed, but I'll just go ahead and say it, because the other 25% of the time, i.e. not as often, I need to not forget that I need my undercarriage. Mixture is on every airplane, knock on wood, at least our GA ones. Props fixed as well. So not fixed as in not moving, I hope, but fixed as in, you know, it's not a variable or constant speed prop. And then seatbelt security is my GUMPS check. Yours may be close, yours may be some slightly different. The point being, do it every time. Don't just be like, oh, I just did it last pattern, so this next pattern will be fine. You know, I'll just check the mixture and bring it in for landing. That's my pitch for safety. Do safety every time. Don't just pick and choose the times to do it, because that may be the time that safety chain gets you. Anybody else have any other cool or any ideas about suggestions? I like the fact that people are chiming in. That was the idea, is to make it a little more interactive and not too boring.
Fernando, why don't we do this? Why don't we send everybody out into breakout rooms just for like 5 minutes here, and they can just share maybe an experience they've had that led them to be a safer pilot.
Awesome.
Or how they've used IMSAFE. So we'll do this for like 5 minutes. I know we're getting close to the full time of the hour, but I think it'll be a great experience for people to share. So I'm going to send you guys out to breakout rooms again just for a couple of minutes. So give me just 1 second. And just make sure you accept on there.
That I wanted to give you guys some good information to not have to listen to me in the future. Here we go. Let's get up here. Here we go. Application where we were. Okay. So what I want to do is encourage you guys all. By the way, I told the FAST team that I would do this on purpose, but beyond that, airsafetyinstitute.org is on AOPA website. If you don't have an AOPA, you can do an AOPA free online account without having to join. But in my opinion, I would encourage you to, because there's lots of benefits to it, and we can do that in another conversation. But Air Safety Institute is one of the massive reasons, because you can go Air Safety Institute. There's lots of good information there. Oh, by the way, using airsafetyinstitute.org's academics, you can actually get wings credit, and it links to the FAA safety website. Or I got the link there for FAAsafety.gov to get wings credit directly from there. They both have excellent stuff. Air Safety Institute has some awesome accident. You can actually YouTube Air Safety Institute or ASI, and they have some excellent accident case studies. Okay, 2 podcasts. There are actually a number of them. One of them is called Never Again, pilots sharing first-person accounts of frightening experiences. And then the one I'm going to use a couple of examples from, and then we'll cut you guys loose from listening to me anymore. There I was. I told you guys kind of it's an old pilot storytelling stuff. What I love about the There I Was podcast is that it's people who did stuff, and they're alive here to tell us the story. They're alive to tell us about how scared they were, about the stuff that happened, about decision making, about and the good news is it's led by a good host, and there's good actual lessons learned for all of us to take away from it. So it's very valuable, because oftentimes on the FAA safety accident reports, you're just seeing what the accident investigators are talking about, somebody who's unfortunately not here anymore. This is the host, Richard McSpadden. I'm bringing it up because the guy he is the Vice President of Air Safety Institute, but he's a former F-15 demo pilot and a former Thunderbird commander. So the guy has plenty of experience. He has lots of risk management in his background. And he really is just a chill dude in the podcast, really just bringing forth people's stories. So, so I'll throw that out there. This is the link, but let me go through just a couple of quick examples to kind of demonstrate what this podcast is. So AOPA website, I'm logged in. There's a lot of resources here we talked about. If you go training and safety, that's where I would just say go there. Lots of good resources. The podcasts are one of them. They're refreshing. They're refreshing right now. So you notice there's a handful here. And we'll go to the there I was. Okay, just to show you that it's a real thing. I'm not just making it up. So I'm gonna give a couple of examples real quick. And then, like I said, we'll cut you loose. Let me go to the first ones because I'm on like number 15 so far personally. All right, Miss Patty Wagstaff, National Aerobatic Champion, probably one of the leading aerobatic people in the country. This first one, episode 1, is her in a Cessna 185 flying in Alaska. And the cool thing about it is she learned to fly in Alaska. So she talks about losing her SA, actually being lost, right? You think about the mountainous terrain in Alaska. She was an instrument rated pilot already, and she had to make a decision to continue to go lower with a low ceiling that was unforecast, or decide to climb through the clouds and known icing conditions, figure out where she was with terrain around her, and then try to make her way home, right? So we're talking about one of the more experienced aerobatic pilots in the country, and she tells us about that. It's a terrible situation. Now, the interesting thing is in Alaska, the circumstances, obviously, we don't want to second guess the PIC making a decision, is that oftentimes the weather coverage is not the same as it would be around a place like here. So it's oftentimes that you encounter an unexpected IMC. But the things she talks about is how she made a decision, what went behind her decision. She assessed the risk and what it meant to her flight. She had a passenger that was not any help to her as far as getting her bearings, assessing the icing on the way up, and oh, by the way, making sure that she was able to safely transition to instruments without picking up a clearance through IMC as she climbed up. It's also, by the way, common in Alaska where you don't have radio coverage to pick up IMC and do IFR flying while you get to VFR on top. And that's what she did. She was thankful. She realized
Fernando, can I interrupt you?
Situation. I'm sorry,
Fernando? Yeah, I don't think we're seeing the right screen. I think you're,
I'm sorry.
You're in the wrong screen.
Let's do this again. Thanks for telling me that. Do you see episode 1, Patty Wagstaff? I hope
that's it.
Okay, I apologize. Thanks for telling me, James. Okay, so that's first story. There's another Patty Wagstaff. She's like number, I think it's number 12. And then I'll do like one more, and then we'll call it good. And I'm using both, again, a very seasoned. There it is, Patty Wagstaff again. So Patty Wagstaff owned a aerobatic 1957 V-tail Bonanza, which is pretty cool. You got to be pretty skilled to do that safely. But the point being is she was with an ex-Thunderbird pilot as a passenger, and they were just flying on a normal cross country from one airport to another on a fun day. I think it was on an air show weekend. No, actually it was after an air show weekend. They were flying to an airport somewhere casual after. Bottom line is though, is their Bonanza, on landing, had a right brake lock. So the awesome stuff about it is they lost control on landing, lost center line, went to the right, actually hit a berm, and then flipped upside down. So a handful of things. One, seatbelts. There are probably 12 of the 20 that I've heard so far were saying me having my seatbelts, and make sure you have your seatbelts at all times, because you never know when you have 10 seconds for some reaction, and putting your seatbelt on is not going to be one of them. And this is one of them. The other one is the brake lock. Like people would sit there and go, oh yeah, you lost center line. And maybe the FAA team or your buddies might sit there, and for most pilots would say, oh sure, your feet were off the brakes, right? I mean, that's what some people would do in second guessing a PIC. Two of the most experienced aerobatic pilots in the country, Patty Wagstaff, and I'm forgetting his name, but an ex-Thunderbird pilot, who works for her at her aerobatic school. We're both in the airplane. They both know from thousands of hours of aerobatic flying that their feet were firmly on the floor. And so they end up going and they just let it ride out. Thankfully, because of their seatbelts, they were upside down and they're looking around going, what do we do now? As we know, in Piper type aircraft and Bonanzas, with one door, right? When you're doing a forced landing, one of the steps is to make sure and have that door open, because sure enough, their door locked up. So what do we do in that situation? How do you handle a forced landing? It was a good lesson learned on, wow, you know, it's a good thing we had plenty of experience and we figured out a way to kick a window out and get out of the airplane. Oh, by the way, they also recognize that when you're in an emergency, oftentimes you're not thinking straight. They both had canopy type breaker tools, and neither one of them like thought about it or decided to use them. Her buddy just kicked the window out and they got themselves out. Last thought, what's one of the steps when we do a forced landing is to make sure you shut your motor down and make sure you cut off your fuel, right? So she did that after the fact, upside down in the airplane, because she's like, I need to shut this fuel shut-off valve off, because they just didn't really have any thought, and it was a normal landing up until that point. But she brought it up as, what would an average GA pilot do when they're doing their forced landing, and how would this airplane, what would the situation be if we're upside down, forced in the airplane, you can't open your door, and you have one of those situations where, you know, some electrical sparks and that kind of stuff. So the unfortunate situation, or catastrophic, if you will, of a forced landing in an after landing fire. There are other examples, but that's just one where she said, thank God for this, this, and this. And there were some factors that worked in her favor. One of them is her and her passengers' excellent airmanship that they already have. But those were excellent lessons learned that she brought back with her. And the last one I'm going to bring up.
And Fernando, we're running kind of short on time, so maybe
Okay,
the members can go take a look at these on their own.
Yep, yeah, no worries. Thanks, Nathan. I'll just use those just to show you that those were two examples. I got those from the stories from them. I'm using Patty Wagstaff because she's a known, very competent, safe pilot. And so I would say fish around if you want to, or if you want to go through all those sites. And I think it would be worth your time. All right, last stuff for club news. I'll just leave it at this and not bring it up. You guys can see, don't forget the wings credits, right? On the right slide. There's the link for the wings credit, I believe, for this safety meeting. Don't forget that we have a wings challenge. DFC, the Desert Flying Club, has a 2021 wings challenge. So if you use this, if you use stuff, you try to get wings credit each month. You can fly with your CFI and actually earn wings credit on a flight. You can also work towards your flight review by earning wings credit. So just a reminder that we've got, we're just promoting wings as making the club safer and better in the Valley. There's your team. That's us. Lauren, who we kind of pointed out earlier, and Alan, who jumped on earlier. Don't forget to reach out. safety@desertflying.com is our email. It goes to all three of us. So if you see anything, if you have any questions, if you see a questionable behavior, if you're a question about a club policy, then please reach out, send it, and then one of us will get back to you. And Nathan, thanks for keeping me on time, or close to on time. But that is the end. Thank you all for joining, for paying attention to me and not snickering at me on the chat too often. And hope you guys have safe flying.
Well, thanks so much, Fernando. It was very informative, and I think getting a bunch of chats here that everybody appreciates it. Hopefully the breakout rooms were fun to do too, for the couple of opportunities. Try that in the future. Real quick before we go, Lauren, are you still on here? Are you able to unmute? And don't know if Lauren, I think she jumped off. So just wanted to make a quick announcement. Lauren is the president of the 99s group here in Las Vegas, and they had a great fly out to Death Valley a few weekends ago. And so she was going to share a little bit about that, but there's some posts on our Desert Flying Club Facebook page if you want to check that out. And I think they had over 30 women pilots that went out there for the fly out, and great fly out for them. So we hope to get, as a club, doing some flyouts again. So Jan will be working on making some announcements to get those out here soon. But other than that, you guys have a great night. Again, thank you for Fernando. And make sure, if you haven't already, the link to register for the Wings seminar was in the chat earlier on. If you need it, feel free to email me and I'll send it out, but that'll make it a lot easier to get you guys Wings credit if you're registered for that part of it too. I know it's 2 registrations, but again, everybody, thank you. And I'll stick around for a little bit for anybody that has questions. I'll be here for a little bit to answer any of those. So have a great night.
Thanks, Nathan.